I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. Yeah, I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. I'm just too lavish. Yeah. Then I hit her with the slammer. Shawty say she like my country grammar. Yeah. Then I pour the lean into the fountain.
Welcome to the Young Millionaire's Mind. It's your boy Shot, and today I'm here with Cy, the owner of Great Print. I want to welcome you to the Young Millionaire's Mind.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate being here.
Now, for the people who don't know who you are, go ahead and tell them what it is you do, how long you've been doing it, and who all you've been working with.
Well, I'm Simon Gray. I am a CPA in Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta for about 10 years now. And I've had a private practice for about 14 years out of Boston. Went to grad school in Boston for taxation, also another degree in financial planning. I'm a CPA, as I said. And Atlanta is a very interesting city because only in Atlanta can I do like the accounting, the debits and credits for a studio. And I did this, and the owner of the studio said, Cy, I got a problem. And I said, what kind of problem? And he said, I got more than $1 million problem. We just signed Trinidad James, one of my artists, to Def Jam. And so that was kind of my onset into the entertainment space. From there, I was a business manager for Trinidad James. That's where it started off. And then I went into being a business manager for Quan, and that was for about 4.5 years. That's where I met Jacquees, and I've done a lot of work for him now up to this point. I was his business manager for a time now. I worked with his publishing. And from there, it's been very interesting because in this industry, there are the business managers are typically their friends, people that they know. They're like, hey, bro, you know math, come with me. Right. And they don't know specifically all of the real skill sets that you need in order to be in this kind of space. So from there, I've been the accountant for many people from JID and Earth Gang and DC Young Fly and a lot of our local neighborhood superheroes. Okay. So it's been a lot of fun. So that's what I do in Atlanta. In addition to that, if I had a claim to fame, my biggest claim to fame is my sister she is an owner of a company, a wonderful company. It's called The Honey Pot. I always have to shout out The Honey Pot. The Honey Pot. The Honey Pot is actually a plant-based feminine-based a plant-based feminine wash company. That's where it started. And now they have brand extensions, which are pads and wipes and stuff like that. But her milestone, a beautiful milestone that she had this year, was she was able to get into over 1,000 Target stores. She's in over close to 200 Fresh Markets and over 25 Whole Foods, as well as doing a lot of business online. And I'm the CFO for her company. So from entertainment to product-based businesses, I'm the back office. I do a lot of debits and credits. Long way to explain what I do, but I think it's important for your viewers to kind of get a sense from a 40,000 foot view of what I do.
So now you spoke of the artists that you work with in the entertainment industry. So how important is it for you to have an accountant early on in your career?
And this is not even biased. There's two people that I think you should have. So I'll speak on me. Of course, you should definitely have an accountant, definitely have a business manager. The reason why is that there's so many things in which you would not understand in sense of how revenue is generated, what are percentages that you receive, what forms do they come in, because they go way beyond just getting monies at a show. I mean, there's publishing, right? There's streamings, there's sync licenses, there's all these things that we will get into. So it's very important to just kind of have an accountant and advisor that understands that from a very technical and also a very global perspective. Second person that you should have, or maybe even first, is a really good entertainment attorney. Okay. Because of course, if you're going to have a label deal, of course, on any side of any negotiations, the attorneys are going to represent their side, their interest. Right. So of course, if you're going into some level of record deal, even if you're going into an independent deal with an independent label, we'll go more into definition of what that means. There are still like clauses that you should understand and understand where these revenue streams are and your splits on that.
And so how much does it actually cost for you to have an accountant when you're starting off?
There's various ways of doing it. what I have seen is an accountant can be, and there's a distinction, so I'll give you two. If you're an accountant for the artist, you are, by definition, probably serving two functions. Okay. You're probably, and I'm going to say it from a rudimentary perspective, you're working as their person who records their debits and credits. And possibly you are the same person that is doing the tax returns at the end of the year. So that's what an accountant does, and they're typically billed on a whatever their rate could be. I've seen from $250 an hour to less than that. I've seen flat fees like $5,000 a month, $6,000 a month, something like that. But business managers, which is a different level of service, is typically in the industry around 5%. That is a person who's going to vet all of your deals from a financial perspective, whether it makes sense for you to take on some level of engagement, whether that's putting your name towards a restaurant or signing a merchandise deal and determining whether that merchandise deal is of value to you from a financial perspective. That's a person who's going to be running your tour budgets to make sure that there is actually income after the tour or not. And there's a person, of course, doing all of the bookkeeping as well as all of the corporate stuff, but they take on a role as a trusted advisor and do a little bit more than a specific transactional thing, debits and credits, or just doing tax return. So I think if you're early in your career, an accountant is where you can start off with. And then I think as you gain either an independent label or a label, or you're generating enough income in the sense of now you have road managers, you have DJs on the road, you have all of these components that you now have to serve as pay commissions to or wages to. That's when you get into the kind of the detail where you would want a business manager.
So where do you see the most errors when artists are starting off when they don't have an accountant?
I think it starts off before the accountant. I think when they start off without an attorney, usually typically the contracts in which they sign are totally not in the favor of the artist. It's never going to be in the favor of the artist. And so when you start with that template, you really have a bum deal. So they start off really bad not being able to take care of their paperwork. But when it comes in terms of as it relates to a business manager, there are a lot of pitfalls. The typical pitfalls that I see is that one, they start off with no kind of accounting, so they don't specifically know what they've made before a show or even after a show. They don't know what are the best rates to set for their employees. They don't even know how to kind of distinguish whether a person should be working for them in the first place. So there's all this friends and people that are around that the day ones, you've heard the term, the day ones. And but these day ones are not equipped in order to provide you services to support your business. If you think about it, this is your business. And so those are kind of the pitfalls that I see. And also too, the biggest pitfall is just leaving money on the table. Meaning that because you don't know all of the streams of revenues, you're not collecting all streams of revenues. And so that's one of the biggest pitfalls, of course. And then what comes from that is what you typically see in the news, which is there's tax issues. And the tax issues are not because specifically that these artists are thinking that they want to evade the IRS. It's just a matter of they've received monies from a promoter or booking agency, which is now reported to the IRS, and over a year it could be, oh, well, we paid this artist about $100,000, let's just 1099 him for the $100,000 that we did. And so they've spent the money throughout the entire year without no kind of thought that there's some level of liability they should withhold. And so that typically when you hear it, especially in our community, it's not necessarily because they're trying to evade, they just didn't know better. You know?
Because I know promoters who'll pay artists, just pay them cash or whatever. So when they go back and file and say, hey, I paid this artist $20,000, $40,000 to perform, but they paid it in cash, how do they come back to the artist and say, you have to pay taxes on this money?
At the end of the year, as long as they have the artist's name and federal ID number or social security number, whatever is in the contract, the contract, regardless if they paid you cash or not, they have the contract with your company's name, typically has your federal ID number in that contract. And so what they'll do is say they'll tabulate everything that they've paid out to an artist, and at the end of the year, it's their responsibility, their fiduciary responsibility to the IRS to report what incomes they provided to other people. So, you know, even whether it's cash or not, it's still income.
Paid it, right.
I still paid this out. And so if they have accountants on their side, their accountants are going to only do what's right. You've received income, we're going to report it. You should know better.
Right.
You know? And so that's the thing. I can talk about an example of there are a lot of reality TV shows in Atlanta.
Right.
Like a lot of reality TV shows. And without mentioning names, what happens in these reality TV shows is that you want to keep up the appearance. You know, you want the Birkin bag, or you want you want to lease the Bentley, or you want to have this kind of like level of lifestyle, right? Now on the television shows, of course, they pay you a specific amount every show. It could be $10,000 a show. It could be depending on your ranking.
Right.
And so I've had people that have come to me at the end of the year because the network issues a 1099 for $200,000. But they were, or $300,000, and they were receiving these monies per episode, but they're using the money and saying, well, I bought all of this stuff as part of my business. And it's not your business to buy a Bentley. That's not something that is specific to your active trade or business, as the IRS uses a term. This is not part of your active trade of business to buy a Gucci bag. It does not support your business. There was a very popular case, and I don't want to get too like nerdy, but Mick Jagger. It was called Mick Jagger versus a commissioner. And the commissioner, anytime you see a law case, it's a commissioner is the United States. And the United States usually has a few cases that go to the Supreme Court each year. And Mick Jagger took a deduction and saying, all of this clothes that I do and all of this jewelry, this is actually for my business. And so he said, the IRS said no, and he said yes, and he said no, and it went from the IRS to the district court to like the local, all the way to the Supreme Court, and he was denied. Right, so this is a famous case where they say Mick Jagger versus a commissioner. That your Bentleys and your Rolexes and all of this jewelry that you buy, entertainers, are not deductible. It's not.
So would you advise an artist to, I guess, get costume jewelry, so to speak?
I think, honestly, and this is going to be a little bit off the accounting side. I think when it comes to the industry, I think that it's a little bit backwards, especially when it comes to us. I think that, of course, a lot of it is circumstantial in the sense of you're only gonna copy what you see, and but I feel like success leaves clues, right? This is a reason why we'll sit down and listen to everything that Bill Gates has said. This is the reason why most of the quotes that Steve Jobs quotes that he came up with are just slogans everywhere, right? Success leaves clues, right? And so when you see artists like the J. Coles and the Kendrick Lamars that are now making, $1 million a show with no jewelry, and they're really concentrated on having real, true content. But the artists that you see that have all this jewelry typically have a life cycle of 5 to 6 years, if that, and are never seen again. And typically, there's so many reports of people who go not bankrupt, but they're broke after their height of success. Why would you continue following that? So the question about wearing costume jewelry is, if that is what you need, then to me, or jewelry itself, then your focus is wrong. You should be focused on bars. You should be focused on content. You're focused on content. Like, you should be focused on what pushes our culture forward in a very positive way. Or you have to do art for art's sake. And I would say that to a Kendrick Lamar, I'd say that to a Drake, I'd say that to a J. Cole, I'd say that to a Kanye, I'd say that to there's a Common. There are so many artists that are at the height of their success. You should emulate, but we don't. Like as a group, we follow the other 99% that are not successful for some reason. But that's me going on my own little deviation from what you're talking about. I don't think artists should wear jewelry as a distraction from talent.
Okay, gotcha. So now, as people achieve different levels of success, a lot of them think they want to start their own record label. How much does it actually cost to start a record label?
Well, a record label doesn't really cost a lot in terms of the incorporation, right? Let's talk about labels. Let's talk about independent labels. Let's talk about large labels. Let's put some definition around that, and let's talk about the pros and cons of that. Okay. So a label to itself is a company, of course, that wants to have the licensing, the masters to the music that you produce, right? What's very interesting about labels, they're not necessarily concerned about what you made on tour, although there's these 360 deals that we'll get into. They want to own the masters, the exclusive rights to the music that you produced. And what labels do, whether they're independent or large labels, is you have to think of them as like a library. Their goal is to have as many books in that library. And in that library, if you ever want to use a quote from that book, you have to pay that library. Or if you wanted to use the likeness of that book, you have to pay that library. And so they make this bet that they say, you know what? We just want to have this broad canvas of books. And if you ever need this book, you need to come to me for this book. And the book is the proverbial master, okay? The master. And so from an independent label or just a big label, that's the goal, is to be able to produce revenues from anybody who wants to have the right to that music. How does that usually happen? Well, let's talk about how music is made in the music industry. Of course, there's music, you're making pennies, but you're making a fraction of a penny for every 1,000 times a song is streamed. But these streams, so lots of popular songs are streamed 76 million times. And again, you're thinking about library. You're not thinking about having one book. You want to have millions of books. So there's variations of how much this is streamed in order for you to collect the revenues, right? In addition to that, you want to collect from, and let's talk about streaming. You also want to collect the monies that you collect from people having the rights to play that music. And so what's very interesting is that, like, when you're at Starbucks and you hear music, or if you're at a bar or you're at a club, right? That club has to pay $2 to $3, sometimes up to $1,000 a month for the right to play that music in their establishment, because they're for profit. They're selling food, they're selling liquor, they're selling clothing. If you're in a clothing store, you're selling some item. And so as part of that product is the music that you play in that store. When you're on the plane, Delta, people don't really understand the Deltas of the world. Have to pay specifically for you to be able to click on their little digital screen and play the music that you do. When you're walking through the mall and they're piping all that music, the mall itself is paying for the rights to play that music in a place of business. And so monies is being collected from there, and that's where the label is looking at specifically, because that will be the longevity of having that book, and that book is forever. In addition to that, money's made from touring. It's very, very simple. An artist goes on tour, you pay him to perform, and you collect monies from that way. And then also too, you collect money from merchandise, from the likeness and the kind, or any type of like endorsement deals.
So now that we done talked about the money, how do artists get paid, the writers, producers, commission splits and all that? How does that work?
Okay, so that's a very deep question, and I'll tell you why it's deep. Is because there are so many people in play that also have to get paid. And so how does the artist get paid? Typically, let's talk about two ways. We have the publishing side, and we have like all of the other ancillaries, which is touring, merchandises, sponsorships, etc. So let's talk about the publishing side.
Okay.
So on the publishing side, there are a couple of agencies that we have to talk about. Of course, you have to talk about CSAC. We have to talk about BMI. And we have to talk about ASCAP.
Right.
These are the ones that you always hear. Well, these are agencies that collect royalties. They collect royalties on the writer side, on the producer side, on the publishing side, and also for the label side. So if there's a song and there's a pie, and let's say that pie is worth $1, based on the contract that they have with the artist, those three agencies say, okay, well, based on that dollar, we have to then give the library, the library, their cut for the rights to the song. We have to give the producer his portion. We have to give the writer his portion, and then we have to give the artist their portion. Sometimes these pieces of the pie can double up, meaning that the writer and the performer and the producer can be the same. Like if Timbaland's on the track going wiki 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 and all the stuff he does, but he produced that and he wrote that portion, and he, you know, and he's a performer. So some of these overlap. In the scenarios that we typically see, you and I have seen, is you'll have a producer that's separate, you have a writer that's separate, and then you have the performer that's separate, and then the masters or the portion to the label goes to them. So that's what that agency is for. We also have another agency that's big in the industry called Sound Exchange, right? You've heard of Sound Exchange.
Right.
The Sound Exchange usually collects the performance portion of the royalties, because there's different parts. If we just talked about a few of them.
Right.
They collect the performance part. And the performer may be different from the writer.
Right.
But as we just talked about, there's also companies like Millionaire. Millionaire scrubs the internet for smaller companies below the YouTubes and collects royalties from the CD babies that may be streaming, as an example, possibly.
Okay.
And then there's also some other agencies that we can get into, but what happens is these agencies have different portions and they collect different things. You've probably heard of Empire.
Right, yeah.
Empire is the new guys on the scene, and they collect a lot of your YouTube, not your YouTube. They also collect your iTunes. They also collect your Spotify and a lot of your streaming places, right? And then also, based on what they've collected, they divvy it out to the producer, the writer, depends on how the splits are.
Right.
So we talked about splits. Splits are the percentage of each song that you actually own, and your portion is your distribution based on that percentage. So that's what publishing is. There's, from a 40,000 foot, there is multiple agencies that collect different portions of royalties by their own specific definitions, and but the sum total of that is each person is getting their splits based on what portion of that. Is it performance? Is it writers? Is it streaming? And so that's what happens.
So who gets paid first?
Pardon?
Who gets paid first?
So who gets paid first? On that, right? So thank you for bringing me back on that. It's really based on how the contract is set up. So on the contract, you could have a label that may be 50% of your publishing. It could be any kind of portions. They would get their money simultaneously, because these agencies are intelligent enough to know where the cut splits are and distribute the splits as it relates to the contract that you guys have. The artist actually has a couple more components. If they have a business manager, the business manager will say, okay, based on the income that's come in, your management gets paid. So your management gets paid. Any kind of expenses related to getting that monies in is deducted. Whoever you have instruction on, meaning that you may have like your assistant, you know, whoever you have defined as your team who has to get paid. Then typically what happens is the artist gets what's left, minus if they have amounts reserved for taxes. Okay. Right. Usually what will happen is the artist then will get their money, will go to their personal account, and from there they'll spend from their personal account. So that is on the publishing side. On the booking and touring side and the ancillary side, if they're selling t-shirts, it's all based on different relationships. If the t-shirt company or like is the person that actually has all of the risk, you may only get 7% royalties. And of that royalties, your management has 20% or whatever percentage it is. In the industry though, what's interesting, and I think what is the problem that I see in Atlanta is that typically there are only 5 people who get paid, really get paid or compensated for their just desserts, they're like for their true value.
Which are?
Business managers, very good business managers get their percentage. Attorneys that are negotiating every one of these kind of contracts get their portion. The management team, whoever if that management is, gets their cuts. And then everyone else is, everyone outside of that, honestly, are making a living. But they're not making the DJs, the securities, the assistants. They're making either an amount of fixed costs or a small percentage per show, but they're not participating in the larger things like publishing, sync licenses, merchandise deals. So they're making a living. I think the problem that the propaganda that we present is that these artists have 20, 30 people when they walk into a club, right?
Super deep.
You know, and all these people with chains, but honestly, if you think about it, there's only 5 of those people in that 40 but are actually making generational kind of, not wealth, but generational income that can go at least another generation.
Right.
Everybody else is just showing up. And I think we project that story, and it then makes it worse for other artists that want to come in and then fan out and have this huge team for no reason.
Entourage,
This entourage. And that creates its own personal issues.
Now you spoke on licensing, merchandise, endorsements, things like that. Explain exactly how that works for the artist.
Okay, definitely. When an artist gets to a level of critical mass, and the critical mass could be #1 songs or a certain amount of influencers, or like they have 1 million Instagram followers or whatever that is. Now there's brands that always want to collaborate with now. Finish Line is a really good one. You always see, like you go to Finish Line, there's always an artist that's on their page.
They just work with Migos, right?
They just work with Migos. So what they'll do is they'll say a contract like that would go through the attorney, and they would propose. Finish Line will say in that document, we want you to shoot a video. We want to place 5 things on your Instagram. We want to put you on our website, and we're going to pay X amount. Sometimes it's a lot. For Migos, I would not be surprised if it's north of 200,000. From there, management gets their whatever percentage is. Business manager gets their percentage. Migos gets their percentages. It's reserved for whatever's reserved for tax is reserved for tax, and whoever else is in that contractual relationship. So that's how like endorsements work. Sponsorships work the same way. And then in addition to that, merchandise, as we just talked about, can go either 2 ways. I think it's more profitable for artists to produce or have an in-house creative team that creates and manufactures their merchandise. There's a better cut. Usually when it's out, you'll get an endorsement deal, not an endorsement deal, you're getting a royalty. Same kind of contract. We want you to post this on your Instagram, post this on your situation, whatever the social platforms are. And then there's a royalty from your royalty again, based on your relationship, label, management, people get a piece of your revenues. Reserved for tax, you get the rest. The artist is actually the person who gets what's left, but it's usually the lion share.
Then speaking of sponsors, a lot of the sponsors, do they fund when artists go on tours?
Yeah, so when artists go on tours, sponsors will do that. I'll give you a perfect example of how that would work. A tour bus to do a 20-day show, or 20 cities. 20 cities. That could easily be $40,000. And that's real math. So the sponsor will come in and pay $40,000 for the tour bus, but they'll wrap it with the Sprite label. Sprite or Coca-Cola or whatever they're selling, and they'll wrap it so that your tour bus is a walking campaign for them. So that exists. They can also give the artist merchandise in order for them to wear. There could be revenues that are shared between them for splits on how much money is coming from a capsule that they've created together. That's how that typically works. There's many ways of doing it.
So now that the tour has been funded from either the sponsor, the label, or the artist putting in their own money, what all should be encountered inside the budget for that tour?
Or so specifically when it comes to a tour, there are multiple line items, and this is where a good business manager comes in place. Tour budgets are really based. Tour budgets are these super huge like Excel spreadsheets, but actually line item out how many days are you going to be on the road, how much is gas, how much is your driver, how much is going to be your backline. Your backline is the people that put all of your your lights, your actions, your cameras, your DJ booth together for your shows. How much all of this is going to cost, how much your hotel is going to cost on the days that you have off, how much of flights coming back home. So your budget entails every single one of your costs, and then what happens is then at the end of that it goes, well, here's what's being paid for through this agency, that agency. So here's your income that you're going to make. Here's all of your expenses, and then let's minus back out all of the monies that is actually going to be absorbed by some agencies or some sponsorships, and then the net is what left. You can't go on a tour without understanding the dynamics of how much money you will actually have by the end of the tour. And so yeah, you actually capture expenses even if you're going to pay them or not.
So do you recommend having a booking agency handle your touring and booking schedule and all of that?
When it comes to, yes, and having a reputable booking agency works. I've seen that there's a lot of and some people might argue with me with this. A booking agency, their typical fee is about 10%. So imagine you having an artist that by his own efforts and his team's efforts gotten his engagement up to 100,000 a show. This booking agent can make 10,000 a show, and he could do this 3 times a week. So the person in me would say, you know what, you should really work with a young agency that more than these mammoth agencies that do this for multiple artists, right? These big offers. What I typically see when you have a small agency, they don't really have their shit together. So like in order having reports, your contracts, getting your money wired at the specific time in which it should be, getting to your business manager the full details of that contract, meaning here's the show, here's the total amount that we paid for the show, here's how much we received from the front end, which is the commitment to the show. Back end is what you receive at the day of show to complete the full total amount. Here's everything in a very beautiful, aesthetically pleasing report is usually what you get from a major booking agency, and that's what you're paying for. You're paying for a company that has a team and a system around it. I do, and you're also paying for the fact that they can place you on a tour. You could be an artist like Chance the Rapper, and that it's not hard to sell you out, but as a booking agency, you have another artist called Day Day. And so you can say, listen, Chance, I want Day Day to be your opening act. Yeah. And so there's this kind of value to have as a big firm. Smaller firms can't do that, and so that's my pros and cons. But I do know like there's one person that I'm very impartial to. I got a shout out to my boy Monte, who's a super dope booking agent. But that's
just you.
That's just me.
That's just you. But based off of your experience, how much would you say it costs to actually do, let's say, a 20-city tour, 30-city tour? From the dancers, tour buses,
DJ,
everything.
Tour buses. I don't think you can do it for less than for 20 days with a decent-sized tour bus, hotel rooms. I don't think you can do it for less than 80,000, and that's really bare minimum. If you're a beginning artist at 20 short show date, if you can get a guaranteed amount of about 10,000 a show, then it's worthwhile because you might walk away with about 50,000 after taxes and you paid your management fee and stuff like that. But that's kind of like a promotional run. And also, there's only one real true reason to tour. Touring is going to actually allow you to have hard ticket sales. A lot of artists don't understand that. They go out on tour and they go and they flop, and they're mad at the world, right? They have 2 million followers, but they flop on tour, and they're like, why? Because they're so, especially in our culture, they're so used to doing club shows. Club shows are like, oh, we'll pay you $40,000 to come to our club, but don't forget, if you said, hey, Lil Wayne, I'm gonna pay you $40,000 to come to Compound. Compound was gonna have a line with or without you. So your $40,000 is just a line, and that's their marketing dollars for that specific night, right? When you go on tour, you're going on tour to see how many people will spend $25, $30, $15 to physically see you perform, which is completely different. So that's one of the reasons to tour. The major reason to tour, especially for a artist that is just coming out, is to really see what the anticipation is really for their talent. A lot of them fail and don't realize your club shows and your tours are completely different things, and they usually leave upside down. I've also seen, and I can't mention names, but there are artists, local artists, that go on these 60-day tours, and they sell out stadiums. But the act that they bring on want to be as big as the large act, and will spend so much on production, but they're not there yet, and can come off tour negative.
I'm just too lavish. 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 Yeah. Then I hit her with the slammer. Shawty say she like my country grammar. Yeah. Then I pour the lean into the fountain. All these racks on me, I feel like stunner. Shawty thought I was flexing. Yeah, I know she did. Till she seen me pull her with the flag. Catch me off in Lenny Square, I be all in need, man. I just wanna hit the mall and play, cause I got racks in my pocket.